On the morning of February 1st, 1997, 41-year-old Stephen Edenfield was found dead in his Tampa, Florida condo. His brother James discovered Stephen lying in bed, covered in blood, after Stephen failed to show up at their mother's home as expected. The scene spoke of extreme violence. There were signs of a fierce struggle, blood splattered and even pieces of a shattered porcelain statue strewn in the hallway. Most eerily, the word greed had been written in Stephen's blood on the bedroom wall. Yet investigators found no sign of forced entry, suggesting Stephen had likely let his killer inside willingly. This gruesome scene set the stage for a perplexing mystery that would haunt detectives and the Edenfield family for decades. The night before the slaying, January 31st, 1997, seemed ordinary by family accounts. Stephen had dinner with his brother and sister that evening. Their mother had just returned home from the hospital, and the family lived in the same Tampa Racket Club condo complex, so they often saw each other. After dinner, Stephen decided to go out around midnight. When he returned home at 12:50 a.m., a dark-colored sedan followed him to the gate of the complex. Stephen stopped at the gatehouse since he'd forgotten his remote opener and asked the security guard on duty to let in both his car and the one behind him. Ominously, he explained that the other driver was with him. The guard lifted the gate for both vehicles, but later admitted he hadn't gotten a good look at the second driver, noting only that the person had dark hair. Within an hour of Stephen's return, neighbors in the building heard disturbing noises. Multiple neighbors reported the sounds of an argument and crashing furniture, and even what they thought were cries for help, abruptly followed by silence. Around 2 a.m., the security guard making his rounds spotted a shadowy figure on an upstairs walkway near Stephen's unit, who appeared to be hiding. Before the guard could confront the person, the figure slipped away, and the guard then saw the dark sedan driving out of the complex. The security guard doesn't appear to have taken any further investigative steps at that time. By the time James Edenfield entered his brother's condo at about 9:30 the next morning, it was too late. Investigators arriving at the crime scene documented the extremely grim evidence. Stephen was found on his back, in his bed, covered only by a blanket. He had suffered multiple stab wounds and blunt force trauma to his upper body, indicating a frenzied assault. The bloodstains on the headboard and the chilling message "Greed" scrawled in blood on the wall suggested the perp had taken the time to stage the scene or deliver a message. Yet there was no ransacking of the home beyond the signs of struggle, and the door had been left closed but unlocked when James arrived. Detectives found a bloody white tank top on the bedroom floor and 2 blood-stained socks near the living room couch, presumably items the attacker might have worn or handled. These items were collected as evidence, including traces of unknown DNA, but in 1997, forensic technology was limited, and no suspect profile was immediately identified. Early leads were scarce, and police questioned residents and the security guard. However, the vague description of a dark-haired man and a sedan yielded no immediate suspect. They also looked into Stephen's personal life. Stephen was openly gay, and while he was close with his family, he kept details of his social and dating life private. This made it harder for detectives to pin down whom he might have been with that night. One acquaintance later told investigators that Stephen had mentioned dating a man named Carlos around that time, raising hopes of a lead. However, despite pursuing this angle, Carlos was never located or definitively linked to the crime, and it remains unclear if he was actually the mystery visitor or simply a red herring. That said, given the subsequent developments, I strongly believe it's the latter. In the first days of the investigation, authorities also noted that one of Stephen's valuable personal possessions had gone missing. This was a custom-made solid gold bracelet engraved with his name. This suggested a possible robbery motive, or at least that the perpetrator had taken a souvenir. The bracelet, gifted by Stephen's mother and unique in design, with double chains and a nameplate, became a critical missing item that detectives quietly kept in mind. Despite these clues, the case quickly went cold. For years, the Edenfield case haunted both Stephen's family and the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office. James Edenfield, who had suffered the trauma of finding his brother's body, was left waiting for justice that seemed increasingly elusive. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, detectives periodically re-examined the case file, hoping new information or techniques might crack it, but to no avail. His elderly mother, Barbara, struggled with the loss. She suffered a stroke shortly before the slaying and never fully recovered from the shock. Sadly, she passed away in 2003, having never learned who had taken the life of her beloved son. Over the years, Stephen's two sisters also passed away, tragically never seeing the mystery solved. James was the last immediate family member still alive, and he had nearly given up hope. In 2022, armed with federal grant funding and new partnerships, the Cold Case Unit took a major step. They reopened the investigation in earnest. This time, they would attempt to harness the power of genetic genealogy to locate the identity of the presumed perpetrator. The sheriff's office teamed up with Othram, a private laboratory specializing in advanced DNA analysis, to apply cutting-edge techniques to the crime scene evidence. Othram's scientists performed forensic-grade genome sequencing on the degraded DNA from the 25-year-old evidence, creating a comprehensive genetic profile of the unknown suspect. With this new profile in hand, forensic genealogists conducted database searches, looking for relatives of the perp. By 2024, this painstaking DNA work yielded a crucial lead. The unknown DNA profile from Stephen's case was matched to DNA from an unsolved 2005 assault in Illinois. In that Illinois case, the victim had provided DNA evidence of her attacker, but the case had gone cold and the assailant's identity remained unknown. Now, detectives realized the same person who ended Stephen Edenfield in 1997 had also committed the violent assault in Illinois 8 years later. This cross-case link was a true breakthrough. It meant the killer was a repeat offender who had left his genetic fingerprint on multiple crime scenes. Importantly, Illinois authorities had once developed a suspect name in the 2005 assault, Brandon Gliha, who was questioned at the time but never convicted. Gliha's name was now on the radar of Florida investigators. They discovered that Gliha, now 47 years old, was living back in Tampa, not far from where the Edenfield slaying had occurred so many years before. With probable cause building, the investigators coordinated with Illinois law enforcement. Conveniently, Brandon Gliha had an outstanding warrant in Illinois on an unrelated forgery charge, which provided a lawful reason to pick him up. In early February 2025, nearly 28 years after Stephen's death, deputies quietly arrested Gliha in Tampa on the Illinois warrant. During the booking process, they obtained a fresh DNA swab from him. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement lab quickly confirmed what they suspected. Gliha's DNA matched the unknown samples from Stephen's bedroom. Confronted with the DNA proof, Gliha eventually confessed to his role in Stephen Edenfield's killing, though he offered a disturbing and somewhat convoluted story of what happened. And by way of reminder, this is by no means the official story, just one narrative told by a career criminal with a history of disturbing offenses. According to an affidavit later filed by prosecutors, Gliha claimed that he hadn't acted alone. He told detectives about a man he knew only as Chino. In Gliha's account, Chino was the one who drove the dark sedan and accompanied him to meet Stephen in the early hours of February 1st, 1997. Gliha alleged that Chino had essentially set up the encounter and that he had been brought to the condo for the kind of liaison that leaves ample DNA evidence. After Stephen and Gliha were intimate, Gliha said he felt violated and angry, suggesting he hadn't fully anticipated the situation. He claimed he heard Stephen and Chino arguing in the bedroom about payment, which hints that the meeting may have been transactional in nature. At that point, Gliha admitted, he lost control. He grabbed a porcelain statuette from the living room and hurled it at the back of Stephen's head. Stephen was knocked down but still alive, and he pushed back at Gliha, who responded by punching Stephen in anger. What Gliha described next was the most chilling part of his confession. He claimed that Chino then attacked Stephen with a knife, stabbing him from behind. Gliha told police that Chino stabbed Stephen repeatedly and also struck him with a blunt object to ensure Stephen was dead, so he, quote, couldn't rat them out. All the while, Gliha said he himself was wiping down surfaces in the apartment to remove their fingerprints. He also admitted to searching for something to steal since, as he put it, they hadn't gotten any money from Stephen. He acknowledged taking Stephen's gold bracelet and perhaps other small items in the hurried aftermath of the events. Importantly, Gliha denied actually stabbing Stephen. He painted himself as a participant who threw the first blow, but blamed the fatal violence on the other man. Detectives listened to Gliha's account but treated it with skepticism. After all, in nearly 28 years, no evidence of a Chino or any other accomplice had ever surfaced in the Edenfield case. The security guard's testimony and the DNA results pointed strongly to a single perpetrator. When pressed, Gliha could not provide full details to identify Chino, and investigators suspect that this accomplice may be a fabrication or an exaggeration aimed at shifting blame. As of 2025, the sheriff's office has stated that it's not actively looking for any other suspect in the case. Authorities believe that Brandon Gliha was the only offender involved in the case, and that he was the man who carried out all the acts that night. On February 24, 2025, nearly 28 years after the slaying, Brandon Gliha was formally charged with Stephen's death. Prosecutors, convinced by the DNA and the confession, moved to hold him without bond as he awaited trial. For James Edenfield, the news was bittersweet. He was 72 years old when detectives arrived at his door to tell him about the arrest. In a later interview, James said he didn't wish the death penalty on Gliha if he is convicted. Rather, he preferred to see the man live out his days in prison as punishment. Brandon Gliha is innocent until proven guilty in a court of law, and I hope to have an update on his case in the near future. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with a quick shout out to all my supporters on Patreon and through YouTube memberships. Also remember to check out my other channels, Lazy Chill Zone and Lazy Chill History, for unsolved mysteries and historical content, respectively. Early on Sunday, March 8th, 1998, the quiet of downtown Toronto was shattered by a gruesome find. At about 7 a.m., police responded to a 911 call from a concerned resident who had spotted a body in the rear parking lot of 130 Carlton Street. There, officers discovered the victim, a young woman suffering obvious signs of trauma. She was rushed to a hospital, but tragically she couldn't be saved. The woman was soon identified as 24-year-old Donna Ogilvie, a recent arrival to the city. It was a shocking and heartbreaking discovery. Donna was not only a young mother, but also 4 months pregnant at the time of her death. Donna Ogilvie had come to Toronto from British Columbia only weeks before her slaying. She split her time between Vancouver, where her family, including a young daughter, lived, and Toronto, where she sought to earn a living. In Toronto, Donna worked as a street-level escort, hanging out in the area around Gerrard Street East and Church Street, not far from where she was found. From the start, Toronto police recognized that Donna's death was a slaying and began piecing together her final hours, and the crime scene itself provided important clues. The details indicated that her last moments involved an intimate liaison that turned deadly. Based on the evidence and Donna's line of work, investigators immediately suspected that she was targeted by a client. Detectives canvassed the area around the parking lot and Donna's usual haunts, interviewing other workers and any potential witnesses who might have seen her that night. In 1998, DNA analysis was a newer tool, but the police managed to recover a male DNA profile from evidence on Donna's body and clothing. This DNA was presumed to belong to the unknown perpetrator and not a previous client. However, when they ran the profile through Canada's National DNA Databank, no match was found. The perpetrator's genetic fingerprint didn't correspond to any identified offender. With no immediate hits and no eyewitnesses pointing to a clear suspect, the case began to stall. As weeks turned into months, leads grew scarce and police looked at other crimes for potential connections. Donna's slaying was one of several attacks on women in the trade that had occurred in Toronto in the late 1990s. In fact, between 1996 and 1998, 8 women were slain under similar circumstances in the city. This spate of violence raised fears that a predator might be targeting vulnerable women on downtown streets. For a time, detectives considered whether Donna's attacker might be a serial offender responsible for multiple deaths. In the early phase of the investigation, one suspect did briefly come onto the radar. Just 3 days before Donna was slain, another Toronto woman had been found deceased under similar alarming circumstances. On March 5, 1998, the body of 22-year-old Christine Ricketts was discovered after she was working as a newspaper delivery person in the early morning of that day. Police moved quickly on the Ricketts case and identified a man named Adrian Clive Paul as a suspect within a day of that discovery. Paul, a Toronto resident who was out on parole at the time, was soon accused and later convicted in Christine Ricketts' death. Given the timing and Paul's history, investigators wondered if he might also be responsible for Donna Ogilvie's death as well. For a period, they examined possible links between the two cases. However, the evidence did not bear this out, and the DNA recovered from Donna's scene did not match Adrian Paul or any other known offender, and no other solid connection could be made. Further, the early theory that a single serial killer was preying on escorts also lost traction as years passed. The pattern of slayings didn't point neatly to one person. With no suspects arrested and no fresh leads, Donna Ogilvie's case eventually went cold. In 2022, investigators turned to forensic genetic genealogy to try to unlock the secret hidden in the DNA from the crime scene. They sent the DNA evidence from Donna's case to Othram for further testing. There, scientists generated a comprehensive genetic profile of the unknown suspect and used it to search genealogical databases for possible relatives. This process effectively built a family tree from the DNA, leading detectives to new investigative leads where conventional police work had hit a dead end. The painstaking genetic research paid off, and by late 2024, the cold case team had zeroed in on a particular family and then a specific individual who fit the perpetrator profile. Investigators learned that the suspect was a man living in Newfoundland, far from Toronto, which explained why he had never before come up in the original investigation. His name was Ronald Gordon Ackerman, a 50-year-old resident of Gander, Newfoundland. Crucially, back in 1998, Ackerman had been a young man living in the Toronto area, not far from where Donna was slain. In the years after the crime, Ackerman had left Toronto, and he spent much of his adult life working in the oil fields of northern Alberta and traveling back and forth to Newfoundland. Given his loose connections to Toronto, he had never been on police radar at any point during the investigation. Armed with their new evidence, Toronto police moved to make an arrest, Detectives coordinated with law enforcement across provinces and learned that Ackerman would be traveling through Toronto's Pearson International Airport on February 6, 2025. They decided this was the moment to strike. On that day, as Ackerman stepped off a flight from Edmonton for a connection, officers were waiting. He was taken into custody at the airport without incident, and in a press conference the next morning, Toronto police announced that Ackerman was charged with Donna Ogilvie's slaying. At present, Ackerman awaits trial on all charges related to Donna Ogilvie's death. As such, he remains innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. The authorities have also indicated that they are currently investigating whether Ackerman has been responsible for any other crimes of a similar nature. Given his vast geographic spread, discovering his further activities, if any, may be quite difficult.